Joining me now is Mervin Jebaraj. He is an economist with the University of Arkansas Walton College of Business. He has been busy in the month of January, and February probably promises just the same. Mervin, welcome back to the program.
Thank you for having me on.
Let's start with on earlier this week, the Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell, Jay Powell, as they call him, uh, kind of laid it all out there and said, we're not going to do these interest rate cuts that everybody seems to think we're going to do anytime soon. That was unwelcome news to the financial markets. It was probably unwelcome news to some of the consumers and maybe bankers out there. They might like that. What was your take on the chairman's comments and kind of what he perceives as the state of the U.S. economy?
I mean, it's hard to second guess another individual. We will get the exact minutes of their discussion, in a little bit, but it's not, to me, it sounds like they're trying to get the markets to not anticipate, dramatic rate cuts this year, that the Fed is still very watchful about the rate of inflation. Now, keep in mind that the last several readings that we've gotten on the state of inflation is that inflation is well within the projected range that the Federal Reserve wants it to be. So the two measures of inflation, the consumer price index, it's very broad-based and doesn't change the products in its lineup. And the one that the Federal Reserve uses, which is personal consumption expenditures, so core personal consumption expenditures without food, without energy, and on a year-over-year basis, that's still little over 3%. But if you look at the 6-month change, the 3-month change, the 2-month change, the 1-month change, those are all 2% or under 2%, which is exactly where the Federal Reserve wants that to be. So you could argue that they're already at their rate. Now, obviously, they can stand behind the 3% year-over-year rate and say, well, we still want that to go to 2%, but there are some compositional effects in there that will take a while to even out and get to 2%. That rate, personal consumption expenditure is probably not going to get to 2% for a little while longer, but I think we can all agree that we've probably broken the back of the majority of this inflation. So I think the Federal Reserve is trying to have it both ways. They want to signal to the markets to not engage in irrational exuberance. But at the same time, they want to, they did change the language somewhat to indicate that the rates are not going up anymore.
Throw back to the
Uh,
old Alan Greenspan there. It was very
yeah,
well done to place that in there. I think too, you know how you economists have like two hands, two-handed economists on the one hand and on the other hand. I sense that the Fed was trying to, they got criticized for not moving fast enough on inflation. So they're not going to want to get criticized for easing off on inflation as much. And that has dangers as well to not cut interest
right.
rates
And
before
so,
it
I,
gets too
yeah,
too underheated.
I think that's certainly, I certainly think that that is driving some of their decision making. But the flip side of that is just because they waited too long to raise rates shouldn't mean that they wait too long to then drop rates, which also has its long-term negative drawbacks. So we've had, minus the inflation issue, we've had a great economy in the last several years. A lot of jobs, wage increases, especially in the last year, wage increases have outpaced the rate of inflation. So we don't want to lose the gains that we've had in this economy. We've created more jobs. A lot more people are working than have in a couple of decades. So there are a lot of gains to keep from this economy, and one way to keep it would be to ease off on the interest rates sooner, so that we don't push ourselves into a slowdown and a recession. Now, um, I think there's still on balance might get that right, but keep in mind that the federal funds rate is just the neutral rate that they set. It's currently between 5.25 and 5.5. When they set this, the inflation rate was much higher. So if you think of, the actual interest rate as being the federal funds rate minus the rate of inflation, then the real interest rate has actually gone up in the last several months, even though they have not changed the federal funds rate because the rate of inflation has gone down. So in a sense, borrowing has gotten more expensive because inflation rate has gone down and the federal funds hasn't come down with it. So I think it's tighter today. Monetary policy is tighter than they had it when they set it five and a quarter and five and a half. So I think my own view is that they should cut soon. I don't expect them to, but that is my view.
Yeah. So let's talk about you had a panel full of economists as well as yourself, being an economist on stage last week in Northwest Arkansas. What was the consensus from the worldview economists and the U.S. economists, as well as your take on what they were seeing? Does it contradict what you think the feds are acting on?
Well, I think so we did have our 30th annual Arkansas Business Forecast Luncheon.
Congratulations.
Yeah. And as a gift to all the participants, we forecasted no recession in 2024. So I think that is sort of the headline takeaway from both the global economists or national economist and myself that forecasted the Arkansas regional economy was that, we are not forecasting a recession, and that includes sort of has baked in what we expect the Federal Reserve to do, which is to not cut rates as aggressively as I would like them to cut rates. So my forecast still does not expect them to cut rates as aggressively as I would. So, we are expecting.
Why do you want the feds to cut rates more aggressively?
I think like I said, the real interest rate has gotten tighter since they set it between five and a quarter to five and a half, because the rate of inflation has slowed a lot more in the last couple of months. And I think the lag effect of all of this is that the economy is slowing. Job growth isn't as robust as it once was. Wage growth is not as robust as it once was. The unemployment rate in the state has gone up about 0.5%. So we're very much at this point still headed for a soft landing. So our growth is not going to be as robust as last year. But what we don't want it to go is from soft landing to recession, even if it's a mild recession, because I do not want to give up things like the increased labor force participation rate, the higher wages that workers have gotten in the last year or 2 years. So I still think the Federal Reserve is probably made up of more inflation watchers and inflation hawks than maybe the broader public would like them to be. Certainly, uh, consumers and home buyers and home sellers would like them to be as well.
Tell me what you see on the Arkansas economic horizon, 2 minutes or less, just to keep us on our time track here. What was the gist of the big takeaway from your forecast?
Yeah, so last year we grew, the net increase in the state was about 15,000 jobs. Our forecast is about 10,000 or a little bit fewer than that in terms of jobs. And last year, we did have 15,000 jobs, which is on average a good year, but most of that job increase, the net increase came from Northwest Arkansas, Central Arkansas, a little bit from Fort Smith. And, surprisingly, we saw Jonesboro not gain any jobs. Hot Springs lost some. Pine Bluff did not gain any jobs either. So last year we saw dramatic declines in the agriculture industry in Arkansas, which sort of drove some of those, no job growth in Jonesboro, which has a lot of agribusiness. So we're hoping for is more balanced growth this year. And again, some of those sectors will depend on how the ag economy does in 2024. But outside of that, we're still expecting, 10,000 or so jobs statewide. About half of that we expect to come from Northwest Arkansas still. So not as great a year as 2023, but not bad enough to be in recession in 2024.
The health of the economy is pretty decent right now, despite partisan spin one way or the other, but there are a lot of landmines out there. He is Mervin Jebaraj, economist with the University of Arkansas Walton College. Thank you, as always, for your perspective.
Thanks for having me on.